Good afternoon. This is the Marion City Council work session. Today is June 18th, 2019. We'll go right into our presentations, and our first one looks like it's already queued up. So thank you, Mike. Take it away, please.
Your Honor and Council, just to give you a little background, so the intersection of 35th Street and 7th Avenue is the oldest traffic signal that we have in place. Ryan has had structural engineers go and look at it, and is it considered structurally deficient, Ryan?
Yeah. Yep.
So there is a potential that those signals could fall over. So rather than us waiting until they fall over, we decided let's do an actual traffic study to determine if that's the best alternative, to just put the signals back up, or should we look at, while we're doing this, other possibilities. So we hired Schneider and Associates to do a traffic study to look at different options. This has been studied in the past, and that's when the signal was put in. But again, we're looking at it again with new set of glasses to see if there's new alternatives to go through. So I have Justin Jackson here with Schneider and Associates, so he's going to give you a presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. I don't need a decision today. We do have some money in the CIP for fiscal year 20 to do some improvements in this intersection, but eventually we will need some direction from council on how we proceed, if we need to apply for some grants or whether we'll use the money that's in the existing CIP. So that'll be at a soon council meeting so that we don't have that issue. So I'll hand it off to Justin.
Well, like Mike said, I'm Justin Jackson with Snyder Associates. We looked at the intersection not only in terms of replacing the signal, but also looking at some alternatives to the intersection geometry-wise, traffic control-wise, that would look at reducing delay, alleviate the congestion, and while maintaining the street functions of 35th and of 7th, kind of two major arterials in town. And as Mike said, you know, the signal is at the end of its serviceable life, so looking to do something there to either replace that or look at a different alternative. And just kind of make sure we're you know, on the same page. We're looking at 35th and 7th Avenue signalized intersections in the close proximity of 10th Avenue and 35th Street to the north, and those interactions between those two intersections. And we looked at the crash history of those two intersections, and then also on 10th and Linden. And there didn't really seem to be any sort of safety deficiency that was at any of those intersections, or just in the little corridor segments between those. So it kind of has a telltale sign of, you know, there's a lot of congestion there, but there's enough congestion there that everybody's going, you know, really slow. And if there was, you know, some of those few accidents, some crashes, that there were, you know, minor injuries or mostly just property damage and nothing major injuries. We also conducted peak hour traffic turning movement volume counts in 2017, and these were conducted just on an average weekday. And as you can see there, the PM peak was the busiest time of the two intersections. So we focused our efforts on evaluating intersection alternatives and analysis during the peak hours, in those PM peak hours. And then moving forward with that, we try to forecast traffic volumes for the 2040 peak hours. And we got some traffic volumes from the MPO, and those volumes that were calculated through their development model were, you know, based off of 2013 counts, kind of, you know, in a weird time of the rebound kind of the recession. So looking at those counts from those, we didn't feel that those were very representative of growth in this area. So we just took a linear growth from the 2017 counts, just a 1.5% growth per year, to the forecast of 2040 PM peak volumes and daily volumes. And that's roughly about a 40% increase from the 2017 volumes to the 2040 volumes. In looking at the 2040 volumes, we looked at really 4 different alternatives for the 2 intersections to see what would be the most beneficial recommendation. And the first alternative was just looking at just replacing the traffic signal at 7th and 35th, not touching the intersection of 10th and 35th, and then adding a little capacity along on 7th. And then basically the alternative B would be that same improvements with the replacing the signals, adding the same capacity improvements on 7th, and then also looking at the interaction between those 2 intersections. And we determined that in the 2040 volumes that we'd have to do something at the intersection of 10th and 35th. And at 10th and 35th, we would install a raised median along 35th, and that would prohibit anybody from turning left off of 10th on the 35th, or anybody coming northbound on 35th turning on the 10th. And then also the third alternative C, we looked at the possibility of maybe trying to signalize both these intersections, but the close proximity to both these intersections, we weren't able to come up with any sort of signalization scheme that would allow any sort of, it would just basically just cause both intersections just to fail and lock up during the peak hours. And then alternative D, we looked at constructing a roundabout, and the roundabout included not only having all the approach lanes at 7th and 35th, but then also having 10th Avenue come back down into the roundabout. And this is the alternative A. And like alternative B, with the future volumes coming from 10th and 35th, it's kind of the initial phase, and once the traffic volumes get high enough in 2040 PM peak that the intersection of 35th and 10th, it would just collapse, and there would be just total gridlock between those two. So we kind of broke it up into 2 different phases, alternative A, and then the second phase would actually include the closure of 10th Avenue from Linden over to 35th, and that traffic would just either divert north or divert back on 31st, back onto 7th and around. In alternative B, kind of the same thing. This is showing the full build, and we have the raised median along 35th at 10th Street. And also to kind of help alleviate some of that rerouting the traffic that you can't turn north off of 10th on the 35th, and then you can't from 35th turn north onto 10th. We extended Linden Drive down to 7th and constructed that as a right-in, right-out, and there'll be a raised median along 7th there to help facilitate that right-in, right-out. And since that right-in, right-out would be so close to that commercial property that's just to the west, closing that access to, so that didn't make another kind of another shortcut where people could really go around the right-in, right-out, and cause some traffic turning left across the 7th. And alternative C, we didn't really come up with any sort of figure for that. We just decided from the get-go that wasn't a feasible alternative, so we didn't proceed with evaluating it at all. And then the roundabout option is kind of an unconventional roundabout with the 5-legged roundabout. And not only does it take up a lot of space, have a lot of impacts on the right-of-way, and then you have the close proximity of the signal to the east and the signal to the west. And to get any sort of progression through the corridor, the roundabout is really not intended for kind of on the signalized corridor. So that's another problematic issue with the roundabout. So not only the cost of the acquisition of the right-of-way, but the construction of the roundabout, also the layout of it, and then the close proximity of the signal. So the roundabout alternative, there may be a better location for a roundabout, but at this location it's not a good choice. So we took all the alternatives and then we analyzed them for the PM peak hour and for kind of the existing conditions and in the 2040 PM peak hour. And this represents a vehicle delay for the total intersection for the signalized intersections or signalized intersection at 7th, 35th, and then at 10th and 35th, that would be represents the delay for the stop controlled approach, and then also at 10th and Linden, that delay represents just only the stop approach delay. That's not the total intersection delay. In the alternatives, A and B, pretty similar delay, except for when you get into the 2040 scenario, and as I explained earlier, we really didn't. It's so much delay that it's impractical to keep that leg open, and then so it's just not a very feasible alternative. And then the roundabout alternative in our actually analysis didn't include an entire corridor analysis. It would just include at the intersection itself. So it's kind of a little bit misleading where you don't have the whole corridor analysis. You don't see the progression of vehicles and how they would arrive to the roundabout, if they would arrive in platoons or just randomly, as this analysis shows for these, a little bit of the delay on showing that. So with those options, we included right-of-way and engineering. So this would be kind of considered a total project cost construction, and those values are representative of today's value of money. In an alternative D, it also has a pretty large right-of-way investment, and then it also has a pretty large contingency that we threw into that project cost estimate just because we didn't have a detailed layout and design of it, given kind of the speeds on 7th and also trying to align 10th that comes into the roundabout. So based off those, the analysis for the capacity analysis and then also for the construction costs, we recommend that constructing alternative B, which would be replacement of the traffic signal, extending the eastbound and westbound left turn lanes, storage length at the intersection, and constructing a dedicated westbound right turn lane at the intersection, and then also the raised median, 35th at 10th, and then the extension of Linden Drive to create that right in, right out on 7th Avenue, and then the closure of that commercial access that would be just west of this Linden Drive extension. And then in this is alternative B, we also, in the right in, right out extension of Linden, it would be a free flow off 7th up through Linden Drive, and it would be stop controlled on the other three approaches, where it would make sure the vehicles that were turning off of 7th, they could get off 7th and it wouldn't queue back on the 7th. And then just trying to, that would alleviate any sort of induced congestion on the signalized intersection at 7th and 35th. And with that, I'm going to open it up for any questions.
Any questions from council?
Yeah.
Mr. Brandt?
So you said the extension of Linden, it'd be the 3 stops, but not coming off of 7th. What about the 10th going south onto 35th? Is that also not a stop? Or is
Yeah,
that
so that stop control that's southbound, that would get removed, and it would just be the eastbound stop control would remain.
Any discussions with Hy-Vee and what they're, they come forth with some plans that we're going to move the convenience store in the back and do a lot of changes there. Does that interfere with us at all?
No, I mean, they were going to do plans with Hy-Vee, but we haven't seen any lately that have come forward.
Has there been any consideration as far as any stacking of vehicles in the westbound lane on 7th Avenue there? There's a fair amount of truck traffic that goes in there to supply Fairway. Some of those commercial entities in there, I'm just worried about stacking of vehicles, because once that one's shut, you can imagine everybody's going to go to the next one. And then I'm just concerned with the stacking concept there, but I'll let you comment.
Yeah, so with that extension of Linden Drive and that right in, right out with that free flow up there, and those larger vehicles that make deliveries to either Fairway or any other commercial properties that are up there, that with that free flow, that those vehicles that are either in front of those larger vehicles or those vehicles themselves, they can make that corner and then get up north of 10th, and it wouldn't cause any queuing spill back down on Linden, off into 7th.
Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, well, I probably, of anybody up there, I probably drive that area more than anybody. I'm probably in that intersection half a dozen times a day. So, I mean, the number of times especially that you sit there, if you're on 7th Avenue heading east and if you're in that left turn lane, I mean, you can sit there any time, and it is amazing how many cars run a red light. I mean, it's only time for about 2.5 cars, and there's 4 or 5 cars trying to get through that thing, and so the only way they can do that is on a red light. And I'm surprised. I'm glad to see the number of accidents and how that's actually lower than I anticipated, but everybody drives very, very defensively, because a lot of us that drive that a lot know we have to be very defensive. So when I first started looking at this, the one thing that made a lot of sense that I never had thought about is the extension of Linden Drive. To me, that's a key aspect of this that really makes that work, and especially if we put new signals in there, add a little more time for people to turn right or left off of 7th Avenue, especially heading north on 35th, and that alleviates a lot of that traffic congestion, and you're certainly accommodating enough cars to be able to sit there by the meridian. So to me, this made a lot of sense to eliminate a lot of the problems of cars turning right off of 7th Avenue heading on 35th Street and then immediately wanting to turn on to 10th Avenue, and then somebody, you get too many cars stacked there and then you can't even turn there. I mean, this is one of the most screwed up intersections I have ever seen, and certainly in our city. Mm-hmm. So to me, this accomplishes a lot as far as the traffic congestion and the problems that I've seen. So.
Yeah, and with this, with the replacing of the signal with this new signal, obviously you take fresh counts, and then the signal will be timed accordingly for the improvements, and then for what actually traffic volumes and conditions are present during, several times during the day, not just just the PM peak.
Mr. Brandt?
The turning north off of 7th, heading west, that will not be no turn on right anymore. Is it only 2 lanes going south on 35th, a turn lane to go east onto 7th, and then you go straight on 35th or turn right?
Yes, yeah. On the south approach, the geometry didn't change at all.
That's 3. I meant this one. Oh. So when you did the study for the 2040, did you take into account the 35th may connect to 100 by then?
We did not make that assumption, even though that the volumes are pretty low today on that portion of the road. I mean, there is a lot of growth that can happen on that approach before you needed an additional capacity as far as northbound.
Were you talking about adding a right turn lane,
yeah,
a straight lane, and a right turn?
Three lanes there.
Yeah, I thought about that idea as well in the past. That's the reason they get stacked up too much there. So, yeah. Could we consider that option and what would be involved in that, and if that makes sense?
Yeah, we could look into that, but really with the way the signal would operate and increased capacity with the westbound right, and then you're eliminating all that kind of interaction north of 7th and 35th, that the signal can operate as such that it doesn't cause excessive delay for that northbound traffic, either a left turning vehicle through or right turning vehicle.
Renee?
Yep. How many cars can stack on that extension in Linden? Sorry. About how many cars would be able to stack on the Linden Drive extension?
In that short span there, that would there's about 3 vehicles there, but it's kind of a yielding movement, if you will. So it'd be a right turn yielding movement, and so the length of that capacity would serve for the demand based off of the traffic flow on 7th and how the southbound flow off Linden, so those vehicles wouldn't spill back Q past the intersection with 10th.
And that's a stop sign on 10th. Let's see, on 10th headed east at Linden. Is there a stop sign that you've put in?
Yeah, so at Linden and 10th, it's all stop control except for the northbound that you would come off 7th and going north on Linden. That is a free flow.
Okay.
There's no stop control on that.
That was my concern, that there's no stop sign there.
Almost anything is an improvement.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's right.
Bad weather.
It's terrible.
Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mike, your request of the council then on Thursday is going to be what for this item?
So we won't have any items on Thursday unless you guys are ready to make a decision. What I'll do is on the following council meeting, we'll have another discussion and motion directing staff to move forward. Whether that's applying for some TSIP funding to try and get some money, or whether that's just using the existing CIP money that we have and moving forward with the project.
Okay.
Yes. And
Yes. One more question, Mr. Brandt.
so how much was set aside in the CIP for that intersection?
I believe it's $760,000. So
That would get us new stoplights right away.
Yep.
Can the stoplights be done and then the concrete work, or like adding the lane?
Sure. So because of the lead time on the signals, like on Hennessy and 13, more than likely we would bid it all at once. Even with that delay, we would have the concrete done first, and then the signals would come in later. I mean, we can order them, but again, if it's going to be a 20-week delay, we could have the concrete done.
That's what I was wondering, if it's something we need to decide on quickly so that we can get new lights ordered.
Well, what is the possibility of state funding on this? Because I didn't think it would qualify.
Yeah,
given
because of the low crash severity,
Right.
It may not be that great, but we're also eliminating conflict points, so you never know. It doesn't hurt to apply for free funding. But if you would rather proceed, I mean, we could go ahead and get an engineer on board, start the design, do the application process. We would find out in December if we got that money or not. Never hurts to ask.
So you would not find out until December?
Yeah, so the application would be due in August, and we would find out in December whether we were awarded the money or not, and if we were not, we could just let the project as a local funded project. We would not be able to get the plans done and let and built this year. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. It's a calendar 2020 project anyway. Yeah.
Do we have relatively faith that those lights will withstand another freeze?
Depending on the timing of the project, we have some options to sleeve the bases. That could buy us some time. I just, until Mike gets direction from the council, we'll wait to see what we can do with that. But there's options to mitigate the risk right now.
Okay, perfect. And that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Any other questions for Mike? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. Next item on our agenda is going to be a presentation from Lux Air regarding the Marion Municipal Airport programs and activity.
Jennifer didn't bring any more.
I don't know how to run this PowerPoint, but can we just open it and? Yep. A slideshow? How does that work? Yeah, I'll get you. Okay, good deal. Okay, so I can just hit the arrow buttons, right? Yep. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. This is Hannah Custis with Luxair Aviation, and I appreciate you having us here tonight. We thought that it was kind of an appropriate time. It's been a long time since we've really done any sort of an update to the council about Luxair Aviation's agreements with the city, operating the airport, and such things. I know there's a lot of questions with the upcoming conversations with the zoning and comprehensive land use. And so we thought it would be appropriate to kind of recap where we're at, the things that Luxair is doing out there right now for the Marion Airport and for the city of Marion, and just give a kind of a quick recap on a few of those things. So Marion Airport, the city purchased it in spring of 2015. There's been many, many, many people that have been involved in getting it from what it was previously to what it is today. And so I want to make sure that it's known that this isn't just something that was Luxair driven or driven by us. This is something that involved Jan and Perry Walton many, many years ago to give the opportunity for this. But beyond that, we've had a lot of council support, city staff, airport advisory committees and groups. PNN Flight and Charter has been a continuous supporter out there, along with we've had thousands of volunteer hours of including from local business leaders and Medco and Chamber of Commerce. So I wanted to point that out. So the city purchased the runway and the old FBO building in the spring of 2015. There's a few key things that happened since then for the Marion Airport with the DOT award of funding. Fiscal year 2016 was when the IDOT awarded the funding for the development of the ALP. That was a 85% state funded award. They also awarded the development for the zoning ordinance and the development for the land use ordinance then as well, and all of those were 85% state match. Luxair agreed as part of our purchase to match the other 15%. So those have been going on since 2016. Fiscal year 2017, DOT awarded funding for the north-south runway design. That was also 85% state funded and matched by Luxair, agreed, and March of 2017 was when the airport layout plan was finally adopted. In fiscal year 2018 was when they awarded funding for the north-south widening and partial reconstruction, and that state fund of $424,620 was one of the largest amounts that has ever been awarded by the state of Iowa for a single project for a general aviation airport development project. So that was significant. And what's not shown in all of that is the amount of time and effort that was spent not only by us, but by staff, by Medco, by volunteers, by PNN at the DOT level to get to a point where they were comfortable with some of the things that were being proposed. I know this public-private hybrid is something very different, and there's been a lot of questions surrounding that, both at the state level and locally. So we wanted to make sure that they were familiar with kind of what was happening there. And ultimately they did, after a lot of deliberation, they did award that funding. So moving forward, I wanted to also recap on some of the things that have happened out there that Luxair has participated in from a private perspective before or since the airport was purchased by the city. We've constructed privately a new FBO building that is ADA compliant, has public restrooms available to it. We've installed fuel facilities there. We offer 100 low lead and Jet A in addition to regular fuel. We've demoed some of the old that were blighted structures that were there, constructed a new maintenance facility, and we continue to maintain the lawn care and snow removal for the city-owned portions of that airport as well. We've also extended water services out to there and installed new septic for the FBO building to service the facility in a safe environment. Current operations out at the Marion Airport, we've got, as you all know, a 3,775-foot long paved runway, 23-foot wide. We've got 50 fixed-based aircraft, and we've also got about 17,520 annual operations. And so when we start, I'll show a little bit further, when we start comparing to other cities of the size of Marion, you'll see that we are very much in line with where you would expect to see us for based aircraft and annual operations, but we're drastically underserved when it comes to the runway improvements. The importance of Marion's airport. I know there's a lot of conversation about whether or not this is just a hobby airport, but in fact, there's a lot of essential services and operations that happen out at the Marion Airport that a lot of people aren't familiar with unless they're out there regularly. Flight for Life is based out there with emergency medical services. We've had aerial firefighting support for helicopters that were going New York to California with all the wildfires in California. There's been law enforcement support, emergency diversionary support for pilots and planes that are flying through the area in the event of bad weather, the need for emergency landings or medical emergencies, disaster relief, search and rescue. We've had a lot of activity was based out of the airport, Marion Airport, during the Cedar Rapids flood in '08. We have air taxi, private charter. We have a lot of ag cats that fly in and out of there for agricultural functions. We provide flight and ground training and recurring FAA testing through PNN Flight and Charter that's there. We have time-sensitive air cargo services. There's planes that fly out of there with freight. And then we have a lot of flights that are business and tourism related in addition to the recreational services and personal aviation that's out there today. So even with the small and relatively unimproved facilities, we have a lot of activity that happens out there. And Marion's Airport is located very conveniently to service the commercial service airports such as Des Moines and Cedar Rapids has in those areas. So regionally, we're in a position to service our area quite well and complement the services that are available both at the Eastern Iowa Airport and the Iowa City Enhanced Services. When you look, and I'll show on a slide a little bit later, the proximity of where a lot of these airports are located, you'll see that they fit pretty directly in line with the highway transportation network as well. And so there's a lot of enhanced service airports and things like that that are on 80 and going north on 35, and some of those that are on the edges of the state. But in terms of the stuff that services to what would be the northeast from us for between us and Dubuque and 151 and 13, there's not a lot of services that serve that direction. And so Marion's really well positioned to be able to offer those services in this area and super conveniently located to where Marion's at. In addition to it being an economic driver, it's the top 6 having proximity to a general aviation airport for Iowa's largest employers and how they rank their site selection. So airport and transportation networks are critical when you're talking about site selections and when we're looking to attract commercial businesses. So we anticipate with the improvements that are being proposed with the new runway improvements that we'll see some really positive things come from that and opportunities and things that are available to us here. I cited a couple of resources on there as to why airports are such a valuable asset, and particularly general aviation airports are an asset both federally and at the state level, and that's why they support them so strongly when it comes to the funding resources. This gives just a little bit of a view to you. I've listed on the side there the 20 largest cities in Iowa. All of them have either a commercial services airport, an enhanced service airport, or are immediately within the proximity of having both an enhanced and commercial services airport available to them conveniently. Marion is the only one that has a basic service airport in the top 20, and we're number, I believe it's 16 on here. This gives just an indication of what our peer airports would be considered. Ankeny and Council Bluffs have populations that are a bit higher than ours, and then I'm also Marshalltown and Clinton that have populations that are a bit less than ours. And you'll see that in terms of population, when you look at the base aircraft and estimated operations, annual operations that we have being at 50 and 17,520, we're right in the middle there with where we should be based on population. But you'll see all four of those, even the ones with populations nearly, almost half of ours, they have both north-south and east-west runways that are highly improved and, service what is needed there much better than what we have. That moves me into our ALP that's been adopted for the city of Marion. As you can see, what's been proposed there is consistent, a lot more consistent with what we would expect to see at some of our peer airports. How that's built out, it obviously remains to be seen and can evolve over time, just as any master plan would or could. But we wanted to show from that perspective the importance of what the value is to these other communities and the value that we should be looking at from Marion's standpoint as well. I wanted to dig a little bit more also into what the differences are between the municipal airports that are operated. This is a comparison to those same four airports, and the hybrid model that is between the city of Marion and Luxair. As you can see on all of those other four airports, they're all owned by the city. They're operated either via an airport authority or a combination of a city management with an FBO operator there. They all have some sort of an expenditure budget. The ones that are not an airport authority with levies, obviously they're smaller, and therefore in a lot of ways their budgets will just naturally be less. Some of those expenditures are serviced either via property tax levy, or there are other ones that are serviced by the services that are charged at the airport. Farm rent is a very big one for a lot of these airports because a fair amount of them own quite a bit of land, and it's owned free and clear that the farm rent is just revenue generated, and then the airport rents and things. So it gives kind of a broad comparison. The runway improvements in Marion are the only thing that the city of Marion is currently providing and has provided as capital improvement. The FBO building improvements, the tarmac and taxiway, the fuel facility improvements, the snow removal and lawn care equipment, having the airport management on staff, and the airport hangars are all things that Luxair is providing both and gets both the revenue for and the expenditures. So as we get talking a little bit more about this public-private hybrid and what that looks like and whether that's a positive thing or whether it isn't, I want you to be aware of kind of some of those things and why and how it differs from that. I think that it's important, we feel it's important to have some transparency. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding, what's the revenue, what's the expenses, what is this looking like, is Luxair, making all kinds of money on this deal? And I think it's important that the council understand for the success of this private-public hybrid of sorts, eventually it needs to be making some money by whoever is operating that FBO. And that was the goal when we originally started this whole process, was we knew that the city was purchasing something it wasn't set up for yet to operate. It didn't have the resources allocated in terms of staffing. It didn't have it wasn't really prepared to do it, but the opportunity was there at the time. So by having the private part of this involved, we were able to accelerate a lot of these improvements that wouldn't have happened yet, and hopefully set the tone for building this moving forward, that by the time we got the ALP adopted, the zoning in place, and the improvements done to the runway, you would start seeing this transition going the other way and hopefully making some profit. And in that, the city would benefit from property taxes that are being paid, whereas a lot of other airports do not pay taxes. And also there's an opportunity there where if it's making enough, there's an opportunity there for the city to bid that out and have an FBO operator actually pay to come here. So there's some opportunity for there to be a revenue generator. At the very least, we always talked that it would be a net neutral and outside of the capital improvements piece of it. And that was what the hope and the intent always was when this was designed. So our lease originally goes for 10 years. We had an option to extend it for an additional 5. And that was mostly because we didn't know where that cutoff was going to be between it wasn't making money when it came in and where once we have some improvements, hopefully there's some crossover and it starts to make some money and there's some value there for the community. So I do have a summary of what our expenses and revenue are in terms of the general operations of the airport. You can see the total profit and loss right now. It's at about a deficit of $113,324. A large part of that is, well, I guess I shouldn't say a large part of it, but a significant part of it is property taxes, which is something that has continuously increased since we've been there and wasn't necessarily anticipated. I have a note at the bottom. You guys probably can't read because it's pretty small, but the property taxes shown on here have gone from $27,000 a year to they're estimated for this next year at $49,000 because the county has rolled back in and is obligating Luxair to pay for the land at a commercial rate that was originally by the council determined to be public use and was therefore going to be exempt. And so there's some things that are changing at that level as well that I thought needed to be pointed out and that you were aware of. We're also providing currently the FBO building. That was something that under the terms of the lease the city was going to be providing. Obviously we were well aware of the fact that the FBO that was existing was aged and really not functional as it sat from a public perspective. So we've taken on that burden and it's actually it's a great asset out there. People are able to use it. Our Flight for Life uses it quite frequently. We have a lot of transients. We have a room that people can stay in if there's bad weather with a restroom that has a showering facility. So it really is a very nice facility and has fit the bill for the growing P&N operations that have been occurring out there as well. And so I guess in summary, I wanted to just make sure that I pointed out that we really have something unique here. Luxair has absolutely gotten involved in the Marion Airport out of a passion for the airport, and we want to see it be successful and be the best possible asset that it can for the community. So if that means that there are modifications and things that need to evolve in order to do that, all we're hoping is that the city will continue to stay the course on reaching higher with this, visioning and dreaming for what Marion deserves. When you compare us to what you see throughout the state, we deserve to have a more improved airport than what we have. And there are a lot of funding resources available through the state and other avenues to help pay for those things. So I know when you guys are looking at budgets and need to be fiscally responsible and look at all of those things, looking at it as a general expense versus having some of these opportunities, I think there's room for both of those things. And I guess I'm not sure how the council is feeling, but our concern is with some of these things that are coming up with the ALP and the comprehensive land use, that potentially there's some reservation there in supporting that, and we just want to make sure that you guys know that we're depending on those improvements to be able to show that Marion can do a lot more than what it's doing out there now. But also, we're proving to the state that we can be responsible with the funds that they've already awarded us and moving forward with that stuff as well. So I'll be open to any questions. I think Jeff had maybe a couple things that you wanted to add.
I just wanted to add it. I'm not going to even try to add to what Hannah's. But I wanted to point out, because there's some concerns last time, I brought a sectional chart. And this is for a Chicago sectional chart, and it shows all the airports and all the obstructions. This is what a pilot would use. I don't want to turn that light on because we're in a hurry, but you can pass that around. But what I wanted to point out is all of the airspace, regardless of...
Jeff, will you go back to the microphone for us?
Right here.
Thanks.
all of the airspace, regardless of if it's a single runway or 2 runways or 3 ones, whatever direction it's going, the airport is always, the airspace around it is in a circle. I know there's some talk about, okay, we get rid of a runway or whatever, can we make this thing a box? Well, there's not an airport in the country that I know of that has airspace around it in a box. So I wanted to point that out to help concern. If you want to protect this airport and your investment in this airport, it's got to be protected all the way around it, because that's the way airplanes fly. They go in every direction. They come in from every direction. When they fly a pattern, even a north-south runway, there's not some of them go real wide. Some of them are obtuse. There's not an exact highway system up there. Another thing I wanted to point out, because there's some people talking about height restrictions and stuff around the airport. If you look at these maps, you'll see towers and things listed. I've found some of them as low as 200 feet are on these maps. And some of them real close in conjunction. You can look at Ankeny. There's 2 tall towers right at the end of their runway. Now, they're not saying that tall towers can live in the same proximity as the airport. You just got to know where they're at. So that's why the process is in place. If you're going to go over a certain height, it's got to be where it shows up on maps and shows up in GPSs so you can stay away from them. But there's a lot of cities that have towers real close to their airport, so that's not a hindrance. It's just there's got to be a process it goes through. So obviously the circle condenses down as you get closer to the ground. Then you have more restrictions at the very ends of the runways. But as far as protecting the airspace, it needs to be all the way around it, because that's the way the traffic's coming and going. So I just wanted to point that out, and appreciate your time.
You guys have any questions for us?
Thanks, Jeff and Hannah. We'll start down here. Renee, any questions? Will? Mr. Draper, please go ahead.
I have a question. We're going to have an enemy to the west as we had last time, about the time we were ready to expand our airport. Cedar Rapids decided that maybe we shouldn't be doing that.
Well, Cedar Rapids is, well, I'm not sure. I believe one of them was at the P&Z and did get it tabled, which that's a huge concern of ours, is that the funding you guys have approved for this north-south runway gets moved in another year. And that's really close to happening, is losing another season to where we have to try to plow dirt for snow removal. And we're hoping we don't have to do that this year, but that's a big concern of ours. Cedar Rapids, I don't know if they were there, but obviously they were at almost every meeting in Des Moines, totally against this. They challenged the validity of it, so it tabled it for the vote. A lot of you probably went around for that for 2 or 3 months until it went to the Attorney General's to say, yes, this is an airport. Yes, Marion does own an airport. So that took 3 or 4 months. And the staff stayed right with Marion, and they had a pretty good sized staff from Cedar Rapids there at each one, saying that Marion should not have this. So,
yeah, I'm not aware if it's continued or not.
I don't know if that's continued. You know, years ago, almost a third of the hangar space out there was donated by Cedar Rapids, but yet the environment's way different today.
Yeah.
Back then, the inherent dangers of having 60-mile-an-hour traffic with 200-mile traffic, they understood. But now, for some reason, I don't know their motivation. I have my thoughts, because I have some inside information I don't want to share in public. But some companies are pointing to the Marion Airport, using it as a bargaining tool for their lease rates. When they see the full ALP, that didn't take very long when the ALP was adopted to be thrown on the desk at Cedar Rapids and says, we want a better lease rate or we're going over here. Mm-hmm. So I know that has happened.
Yeah, and our concern really has been not so much focused on that, because Cedar Rapids East Iowa Airport is a really good asset for Marion as well. We're really far more focused on what does Marion deserve, and that we're getting our fair shake that also helps us compete in a marketplace where transportation networks are key. And, this community was built off of rail systems and formerly, and doesn't have that anymore. So we're relying on highways and air transport and things like that to be kind of our driver, and this could be a very important thing for us.
They did fight us vigorously last
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yep. They spent a lot of money fighting it, but it was a good day when we won and they all had to leave the room.
That's interesting.
It was kind of fun.
Your towers, when the FAA lets a raceway being built right next to a railroad track at Newton, we had 50,000 people sitting there. And, you know, it doesn't seem like maybe we should argue about a radio tower that's sitting out here.
Yeah, there's a lot of towers around. If you look at downtown Kansas City, the downtown airport there, which is very important to a lot of generating traffic, their towers are like 1,200 foot right off the side of the runway. And so it can be done. It just has to be done in a process. Certainly, the Marion Airport, at least in our perspective, it's your airport, but our perspective, we'd just as soon everybody grows, and one shouldn't impede the other. And I don't think the airport's, it's been there 60 years. It's just happened to never have zoning to protect it before. And the city has spent a lot of money already owning an airport, and there's really essentially no protection today for it at all. So certainly before any more monies, whether the city would spend money or the state, there should be some protections for that airport. So.
I have just one last question here before I let you go. Do any of the comparable airports that you listed up there, do any of them charge landing or takeoff fees?
You know what? I didn't look at that. Some of them may. We certainly do not. We really don't have the facilities there to support charging takeoff and landing fees. Maybe at some point in the future when we grow to a point where we've got that much traffic, that would be great that we do. But I am sure there are some that, if at the very least they don't charge landing fees, they probably offset that by requiring you to maybe fill up or park there, or, you know, and pay for parking or some of those types of things. So there's other methods, I guess, that a lot of airports, especially larger ones, use for generating revenue. So I would assume some of them do, but I haven't specifically looked at it. We can look at it if that's something that you guys would be interested in.
I fly into airports like Marion, most people do when they're generally flying around the country, stay out of the big airports if they can. Paige, in Florida, they'll charge you a tie-up fee. They don't charge your landing fee or anything like that, and you can use their facilities. They give you, if you get 40 gallons of fuel, they give you 3 days of tie-up, and then it's just a nominal fee of $8, $9 a night to tie up there if it's outside, more if you need to be inside. So it's not a lot. We don't charge any for tie-up. We encourage it.
Probably some of that is dictated by whether they're based aircraft versus transient, and some of those types of factors, I'm sure, are taken into consideration.
I think it would be, in my personal opinion, I think it'd be important. You know, we're comparing all these other items to that. It is a revenue stream, and it's something that I would be interested in seeing. You know, we do these comparisons, and I feel we don't show all of the information. Also, too, I'd like to know what actually constitutes an operation. Do touch and goes count? Are they complete landings with shutoffs? I see this number fluctuate on each one of these pieces of paper that I have here, and I'd like to just know what is.
I'm not 100% sure what they use as a count.
Okay.
I'm sure. I know when we use Cedar Rapids Airport a lot for our training, because we don't have approaches or anything in Marion. So any type of IFR train that we do, the currency, I'm getting counted. Marion Airport gives them a lot of counts a year that they get to use towards their funding ask. But just flying the approach and being in the system, you're counting. So you're actually, as soon as you call the tower at Cedar Rapids, I'm sure you're counted as an operation in their airspace, and it almost gets to Marion. So if you go straight south at all at 2,500 feet, you're in Cedar Rapids airspace, and it's a Class C, so you have to be talking to them. So you got to have your transponder on the code, and I'm sure they are counting that as an operation in their area because it helps with their funding. So,
okay,
and I very rarely actually touch and go when I fly approaches. I'm just there to check the instruments and stuff out.
No, I just think it's beneficial for the council to understand what a what an annual operation is and how that number's calculated, so.
Quite a few planes in Marion don't do touch and goes just because the runway is too short. So I think
Sure.
depends on how far they float down the runway before they give it gas again. So
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. That concludes the presentation from Luxair Aviation. Next item on the agenda is going to be a presentation from Tim Schaefer, I believe, from the chair of the Marion Municipal Airport Committee.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening and welcome.
I apologize in advance. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, so you have to bear with me. I have been the chair of the Marion Airport Committee since its inception. I'm a commercially rated pilot. I have an airplane, and I tenant out at Marion Airport. I'm also work with the FAA as a FAST team member, so I have a really strong obligation to safety, and safety happens at every airport, so it was important for me to get involved with this. This is my testimony is basically how we got to where we are. When we were formed, we were you already owned an airport. Marion owned an airport, and we were asked to advise City Council on what that would look like. And we weren't given any option, or all the options were available, including moving the airport entirely. We looked at the soil samples, soil types and waterways, and what the expenses would be. The determining factors for the location were how the property was adjacent to Medgo and to Highway 151 and its closeness to the community in general. As a committee, we spent years researching what would help, with the help of consultants, the possibilities would be best for the city of Marion, i.e. runway lengths, runway widths, and runway orientation, and comparing them to communities of the same size. This is how the ALP was founded, and we stand behind it. We as a committee also studied the impact to our neighbors regarding aircraft noise and height restrictions. And the determining factors with this, with consultants' help, was that it would be minimally invasive to our neighbors. In fact, most of the noise problems would be less than the highway itself. So the next thing I've wanted to talk about is that I've lived here my entire life, and I've seen what has happened since the 1980s. In the 1980s, middle of the 1980s was the last time the runway environment was improved. And I have nothing to do with Luxair. I'm just talking about the runway environment. Since that time, we've moved the pool. The pool is no longer down at Thomas Park. It's been upgraded. When I was a kid in the 80s, we had Carnegie was the library. That's been improved. We have a bypass that goes around the outside of town that freed up traffic. All these things have improved or gotten better, and the airport environment has stayed the same. And in fact, has been degraded. We have a runway right now that is crumbling, falling apart. The lighting system you buy at Menards, it's not standard lighting. The runway is so small and narrow that the FAA doesn't even have standardized lighting for it or lining. So it's a problem safety-wise. So what we did was we looked at, since the last major upgrade, the committee is simply trying to provide a recommendation for the airport that is suitable for the population like Marion. So if you look at Monticello's airport, they have a runway width of 75 feet and 4,400. We're at 23 feet and 3,750. We are third as wide, and yet we have as much traffic as they do. For a population of 7,000, we're 40,000 strong. We have a runway that is a third wide as Monticello's. And Cedar Rapids is 150 feet wide. So there's a huge discrepancy in what we have for services here at Marion. So I'm not only on this committee to talk about safety, but as an owner and a pilot, there are serious concerns as far as we only have the one runway. So in crosswind traffic, we don't have a suitable east-west. And that is one of the things that are very important to safety going forward, It allows the airplanes to land without having to do much deflection to make those landings safe for the airplanes. So in conclusion, you as a city council have an opportunity to stand behind our recommendations and make a generational change for this city. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for Mr. Schaefer? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're going to continue on through our agenda here. We have the consent agenda. This will move through administration services. We'll just kind of go through these. If there's any questions from the council. There was nothing starred in this particular category. I'm sorry.
That's
Ms.
okay.
Fidelia, please go ahead.
I had spoken with Lon yesterday and asked that item number 8, A8, the fiscal year 2018-2019 budget transfers be removed from the consent on Thursday, and like a presentation or something be given to kind of, it's the first time we're getting it in this format and the breakdown, and it's a lot of money transferring, and so I believe Leanne will be presenting that. Is that right, Lon?
Yeah, we're anticipating that that'll be out for separate action on Thursday.
Terrific. Thank you. I think that's all I had on that page. Oh, no, I did have one more thing.
Yep,
Oh, no.
please go ahead.
Oh, wait. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So just in summary then, A8 we will be pulling out of the consent, moving into the regular agenda. Any other items in that category before we move on to public services? Seeing none, we'll continue on. Public safety, there wasn't anything. Parks, nothing. Engineering? Any questions on that? Okay. We're going to breeze right through this. Back to community development. No items are starred in that section, but any questions? Library, nothing starred. That moves us to the regular agenda. First start item is going to be a resolution approving the proposed allocation of hotel motel funding. Do we have a brief overview of this, please? You've been so patiently in waiting. Thank you.
Yep. So we'll be getting a presentation from Brian McKenzie. It's actually his 1-year anniversary here with the city today, so we just wanted to recognize him for that with the finance department.
Happy birthday, first presentation.
Wait till your second.
So I'm Brian McKenzie. I'm the accounting associate here, and I'm the facilitator of the hotel motel program. So good evening, council. So the hotel motel program is where we can utilize the extra tax dollars for the hotel motel tax to put back into our community to promote tourism and to hopefully have a direct increase in the hotel stays here in the city. We have a hotel motel grant program that we run each year, and so for the fiscal year of 2020, the applications opened on April 1st, and they went through until May 10th, and then we had a committee that included 6 members. We had Randy Cernad, Emily Buck, Amanda Kaufman, Amal Altahir, Amber Bissinger, and Ben Kinseth. And they reviewed all of the applications, and they submitted their scoring and their rankings, and that was compiled by myself for the meeting that took place on June 12th. So the budget for the year for the hotel motel funding was $175,000, and the total applications that we received was 17, and that was totaling $313,925. So the committee met on June 12th, and they reviewed the scores, and they recommended the funding that you can see on the screen there. I'm not sure if you'd like me to read down the list, or would you just take a moment to read, or
I think we,
so if everyone can see that. So obviously there was a challenging task to allocate 175,000, and there was 4 out of the 6 members present at the meeting, although all 6 gave their scorings and their rankings. So if there was any additional questions about the procedures or the...
Any questions for Brian?
Yeah, Brian.
Ms. Gedalia.
This is a fun, this was really fun to look at, to see the pot of money and who applied, and that we have this money that we collect that we can then put back into the community. I was not concerned, but just curious about only receiving 17 applications. Is this because this is relatively a new thing, or is it not really promoted? I mean, it just seemed like a small number for free money.
That's average for, we've been doing this program for a while, and that's an average amount of applications received.
Wow.
I think it was 1 more than last year, so.
Interesting. That's it. Thanks.
This is my 3rd year participating on this committee. I want to also, first of all, thank all of the individuals that are on this committee, as well as all of our committees. Brian, you did an excellent job with this. This is a matrix process, so when the applications come in, each one of these items are scored and ranked on critical categories as to funding, whether it's something that brings in revenue from overnight stays, things that are needed from hard assets, things that are used for marketing. There's a lot of thought and process that goes into this, and it's always challenging because there's always more asks than there are money. So unfortunately, there's just not enough to go around. We look forward to next year, right? Additional revenues coming in and expanding this, and part of the mayor and I had an opportunity to attend the square dancing, which again, that's just one of several of the items that were given back to the local community, to those organizations that allowed them to come in, host their event here, which turn around and generates more revenue through sales and overnight stays again. So it's a nutritious process. So for me, I wanted to say thank you. Well done on your first one. And I wanted to thank the individuals that participated in this. But it's a great organization, great process, and we look forward to them in the future to be able to give that back out. Any additional questions to Brian before we release him off the hot seat? Seeing none, well done. Thank you, sir. Moving on to the next item, start under the Administration Services, will be the resolution setting the date for the public hearing on proposal enter of the general obligation urban renewal loan agreement. Who would like to, who's going to lead that one for us?
I'll take that one.
Mr. City Manager, you're up, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, this is for the city's capital contribution to the new regional recreation facility, joint YMCA, the project that we've been working on with them for quite a while. It's one of the last 2 projects that we have left from the original round of Imaginate. We will complete the financial analysis. Our bonding consultant will come back with us for a full recommendation on the best way to structure the bond, but the amount that we're authorizing here would fulfill the remainder of our pledge to that. I would anticipate that we will actually borrow slightly less than that, but she has to make the determination on the best application of local option sales tax, et cetera, whether or not we're better off to use it as cash in hand, whether or not we're better off to structure the bond. So this kicks off the process for us, though, and we would anticipate everything wrapping up and having the dollars available for that contribution in the end of August.
Any follow-up questions for Lon on this topic? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Lon. Appreciate that. Next item is resolution approving amendment to loan guarantee with Prospect Meadows. Perhaps that may be yours as well.
That one's mine too. Okay. Again, we're making a capital contribution to Prospect Meadows. We also have a loan guarantee for part of their financing, which is the piece that we're considering here now. Essentially what we have to do with our guarantee agreement is allow for the mortgage holders to place their mortgages on the property. So the modification being contemplated here allows for them to finish up their USDA financing, finish up the private side of the financing, and then move forward with getting everything in place for finalizing the construction of their project.
Any questions from council? Ms. Gedalia?
Yeah, I think I read it in the paperwork, but I just wanted to confirm. And this is the exact same thing that Cedar Rapids and Lynn County is doing too, kind of to back the mortgage, so to speak.
Yeah, Lynn County and Marion each took on part of the liability for the guarantee for the private financing. The USDA loan has an 80% loan guarantee from USDA. This is a separate one behind that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the city manager? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you again, Lon. That puts us through the public services category here. Again, nothing starred in here, but any follow-up questions are entertained here? None? Okay. Public safety, nothing's recorded. Parks, again, nothing recorded here. Engineering, it's always a great day. Mr. Mike, you're on deck, sir.
All right, so on Thursday, we will have our first public hearing on the 3rd Avenue Rehab Project. So on the screen, this is the project. This is just north of the Peg Pierce softball complex, basically between 31st and 35th. They'll be done in different stages. And this is basically similar to what we did on 31st Street to the south, where we go in and we do the patches and then we grind it when we get done so it's nice and smooth. So this helps bring the longevity of the street in there. So for this project, we did get 2 bids. Eastern Iowa and Rachi, the low bid from Eastern Iowa at $233,276.65. 82.5% of the engineer's estimate has a late start date of 8/5/19, 45 working days, and there's $500 per day in liquidated damages.
Any questions for Mike on this topic? Yeah. Mr. Brandt?
Is the road going to be completely closed?
In the sections that they do it, for example, the orange section will be done so that businesses still have access. We can't close the whole thing down like we did when we did 31st.
Right.
We'll have to do it in separate stages. So each color represents a stage of the project so that everybody continues to have access.
But
you will not
like
be able to
orange will be complete. That'll all be closed and done at once, so you can't go through. Okay.
Yep. So you won't be able to get through on 3rd Avenue, but there'll be a section. So depending on what business you want to go to, you have to come from the east or the west.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Jensen?
Do you have an estimated timeline? If that starts 8/5, do you have an estimated timeline on how long that might take?
Yes, that's what our working days are. They have 45 working days.
45 days.
Yep.
Okay,
They have
so that'll be
45
done.
working days to complete that.
Okay. Thank you. I missed that. I focused on the start date. Thank you.
Number 3, sir.
Number 3 is a second public hearing. Then we combine both our sidewalk ramp project and our sidewalk assessment program into one. So this shows the various locations. On this one, we did get 4 bids. The low bid was from Curtis Contracting at 92.3% of the engineer's estimate, $144,480. Has a late start date of 8/5/19. This one has 50 working days in it and $300 per day in liquidated damages.
Any questions on that one from council? Are we starting to see some new names coming into these bids here?
No, so a lot of times it's been Midwest or Hunt that have been the low bid on this project. Curtis Contracting used to do quite a bit of our sidewalk work. They went and worked for Cedar Rapids for a while. I'm sure you've seen the news that Cedar Rapids touted their ADA, but a lot of that also was making the contractors put the ramp in 5 times and not telling them why, and so it makes it so you don't want to work for that city anymore.
Sure. Very good. We'll move on to number 5.
So number 5, we will have the public hearing on Thursday, but then we will actually ask you to table the bids that we received on number 6. The previous property owner may want to ask for the property back, so we need to wait until the 29th in order for that to go through. But we did receive 4 quotes for the demo of everything on that property, the low being from Abode at $29,200, which was 88% of the estimate. So we can still have the public hearing, and then we'll just table the award until after the 29th.
Any questions for Mike on number 5? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 7.
Number 7 is approving a change order with Price Industrial. This is for the 13 at Hennessy Parkway. This is the traffic signal. So as we had previously discussed, there was a 36-week delay in getting the actual signals. That was through Miller Bend is the supplier. There was a more expensive supplier, Valmont, who's actually where we get our poles from, our black decorative poles, but they were an additional $4,000. So we checked with the developer if he was willing to pay that additional $4,000, if he was willing to speed the project up, and he said absolutely. So our contract is with us and Price. We have the $500,000 grant that we got from TSIP, and the rest is part of the development agreement where the developer pays for the rest. So the city fronts the money, and then the developer or the DOT then reimburses us for that project.
And what's the turnaround time on the reimbursement, approximately?
So it depends, like the portion that we get from the developer, the MOA says once we've accepted the project, the DOT, we do it in segments. So as the contractor gets milestones done, we typically do a monthly payment, and then so often then if it's large enough, we'll request money back from the DOT. But if it's $1,000, it's not worth going through the amount of paperwork to get the $1,000, so wait till it's a bigger check.
Sure, okay. Any other questions for Mike on number 7? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Number 8.
So number 8, we actually had a citizen request to add a disabled parking space for a commercial building. And so with that, I was looking up the policy and found out that we had actually never adopted the policy from 2013. So basically, there's already an application with our new logo and everything on it, but it actually had not been adopted. So what this is if someone lives on a residential street where maybe they don't either have a driveway or maybe it's hard for them to get from their garage to the house and it's easier for them to park on the street, they can actually apply for a permit. We do have one out there right now. And so it's just a way for them to have, it's not a dedicated parking spot for them per se, it's for anyone that has a handicap placard.
And is there a designated area marked off on the street, or is it just the by sign only?
So this sign that you see on the PowerPoint is the one that's out there for the one property currently.
Okay, but no lines actually on the street? No. Okay. Any other questions for Mike on number 8? Ms. Cadea?
Paul? No, you're beeping.
You're beeping.
Okay.
Mike, I just wanted to ask, so if they move, you said anybody who has that, the hanger that indicates disabled, we leave that then? We would never take it back down because it's really for anyone? Or once it's up, it's a lifetime thing?
So in the policy, it has in there that there's every 1 year they have to pay to keep it up. Now, whether we actually go take it down because we have other things going on, it doesn't hurt anything to sit there, but typically we would take it down. But again, this is the only one that we have in the city.
Right. We'll have to add this to our sign matrix to keep an eye on these things.
It's not faded so far, so we're good.
Do we have any way of, I guess I do like the fact that if the permit is not reapplied for, and it terminates, that we do have, I would think we would want to try to keep our streets clean of signage that's not necessary. I realize it's a work order to go out there and remove it, but it's just one, we're running into that issue now with signs that we can't read and so forth. It would be nice to see something.
And the only one that I've done personally, we did one where it was temporarily put up during a construction project because they lived in the middle of the block, and we had the whole street tore up, and that way they had some handicap parking during that construction project.
Sure. So we'll see this item up here then to us. We just basically need to complete the process.
Yep.
So it was approved, but it was never,
Yeah, there was a motion directing staff to approve approve it, but not an actual policy, so.
Very good. Okay. We'll see that come back on Thursday then. Seeing that there's no other questions on number 8, we'll move on to number 9.
All right, number 9. So we wrote the letter to the DOT, and that council, it's in your council packet, the actual letter that we wrote, where we talked about all the changes that are occurring, Prospect Meadows, Rookwood development, the church, the school, all the different developments that are happening in that area. We asked for the speed limit to be reduced. So the picture on the left is what we previously had requested. So the reddish orange color is where we asked for them to take it from 50 to 45. The yellow, we asked them to make it 55. And then, the black line there is we asked them to put it 50. So this would be 62nd next to the police station, and asking them to do 50 up here by REC. When they went through their process, the only changes they made was at Casina. They took the 50 and they put it north over to Prairie Ridge Avenue, and then they moved the 55 from between Casina and Prairie Ridge to north of 29th. So when we had the meeting with the DOT, Councilman Brandt was able to attend that meeting. Basically, if they were to go out today and do the speed study that you guys have seen previously, things haven't changed yet because that development hasn't occurred yet. And so there would not be justification other than engineering justification to lower that. And the DOT tends to lean on that traffic study very heavily and determine then what they should do with the speed. So what they're looking for is, what does the city actually want to see for speed limits out there? So I have our original proposal out there, but I wanted to open up to City Council to have that discussion of what you guys want to see, and then we can present it to the DOT. That does not mean that's what we're going to get, but it doesn't hurt to ask for it.
Discussion.
I have a quick one.
Yes, Ms. Goodale.
So this went through TAC to come up with this, or
No,
it would
well,
get pushed?
previously it had. This
Okay.
was the request that went back to them. It was like 2015. It got changed in 2017. So at this point, we're just, because council said with all this development happening, we need to start looking at this now. So we're looking at council of what do you want for recommendation first before we even start looking at it.
That's my personal opinion, but
Well, I think what drove the conversation was when the light is put in at Hennessy Parkway, all of a sudden that traffic isn't flowing at 45 anymore. I mean, it's starting from a stop.
Mm-hmm.
So moving the faster speed limits further north certainly would make sense to me because of, I mean, this doesn't reflect the stoplight there at Hennessy Parkway. So once we put that in, at least my Danish logic says move the faster speed limits further north. But again, that's one of the reasons for the recommendations. I thought that was driving that.
yeah, I agree. And I also think that the Rookwood Estates, Pelly's big development that's coming in there to the east of
That's here.
Yeah.
Keene, especially because it's only going to have one outlet for a while, was another reason I think
Right,
that we're sitting
right.
here with this. But I don't really have a thought on what it should be. I would defer and look to y'all's expertise on that.
I have a thought on it. Go ahead, Mr. Brandt, please.
Solution.
In my mind, I think from Linear Ave south of Walmart there, where the stoplight is at Walmart, all the way up to, well, I was saying 29th, but maybe 35th should be 45. Because once the school gets built out there on 35th, you're going to get a lot more traffic, I think, coming over to the highway. And then it's only going to grow with the development around the school. Then you've got the church, everything north of 29th. So I think where we're having development, it should be 45 all the way through, and then going out at least to Culver's to the east of 45 also.
Well, the caveat to that, I'm not sure that I'd agree to 30 all the way out to 35th. While the school is going to be on 35th, all the bus traffic is going to go on 29th Avenue down 44th Street. Because 35th is going to be a gravel road for quite a long time until improvements are made on it, and I don't see, that's still county, so I don't see that becoming a paved road for a number of years down the road. So I think this opportunity to change it will come up again. But all the school buses are gonna go 13 to 29th, up 44th Street, and then on 35th to the school, so they're not gonna drive on 35th on gravel road and
Gravel.
all that mud, so I've already talked to them, and they said
They wouldn't do the gravel?
they're not gonna drive it.
They are the bus drivers.
The buses?
The bus, yeah, the school, yeah. So I'd be certainly understanding of 29th, but I think 35th is probably pushing it.
Sure, and that's what I originally was thinking, 29th until like 5 minutes ago. When
Yeah.
we started talking about this, I said, well, maybe 35th.
Yeah. In the future,
But-
that'll make sense.
Mhm.
But I think that's gonna be a ways down the road yet.
But yeah, at least the 29th then, in my mind.
Yeah, and like I said, we can ask anything. It doesn't mean that's what they're going to give us.
Right, I know, that's just like last time.
One thing I'd like to add is, to that as well too, but we have those rolling hills going northbound, and you got those turn lanes in the center and slower traffic on the backside of those hills. That's always a obstacle I witness as well too, where you got cars that are stacking up, slowing down, getting ready to execute, going into that turn lane, and you got cars popping up over the hill at that 65 speed already. So I think it's unanimous that we would like to move forward with that direction of letter, and if that needs to be worded with the support of council, we certainly would support that.
Yep.
Unless there's any other questions with number 9, we'll move on to number 11.
All right, so now we get to talk about FEMA maps. So basically, the current map that we have used the picture on the top, and so you can see it's really clear. And
Really?
the new data with the new LiDAR data is what's on the bottom. So we had a lot of parts of the city that were not mapped very well, and every time we've done this, it's gotten better with the map and actually gotten the map so that the flood boundaries are known better. So some like the templates to show where we're at. So this started back in 2014, and the city really didn't have anything to do with it. This is just the DNR and the FEMA going through their process. So you can see 4/16/19 was a couple months ago is when we started the process of doing the firm production. We do have a copy of it in the city manager's office if you guys would like to actually see the maps. But we had the meeting in May to see the actual changes that they're proposing. And so what we did in the previous years is we actually sent a notification to everybody that this affects, and it was about 600 and some properties. So we just do little postcards, that way we don't send them a full letter. But what it does is because you're changing that data from the top picture to the bottom picture, is some people are in the floodplain that weren't in the floodplain and vice versa. And so those of you in the insurance business, then there's requirements to have flood insurance depending on the source of your mortgage. And so that way we can let them know if they need to do letters of map revision or anything like that, they can do those to prove that maybe even though they have better LiDAR data, that maybe the building is built at a higher elevation because it's still off by 8 inches at least. So it's still not perfect. So the process that they go through then, and this entire PowerPoint was put in your council packet. I'm not going to go through all of that's in there. So right now we're in the community review and final meeting. So we're going through the maps ourselves in the engineering department looking for things like spelling errors, name street errors, or areas that it appears that for whatever reason their maps are apparently wrong. So for example, maybe they had a ditch that went through a house temporarily in one phase of a subdivision. Now that subdivision, there's a house there. Well, obviously the floodplain doesn't go through that house. So there's some obvious ones that we point out to them. But then there's an appeal process that gives residents 90 days to appeal. So that similar, they can say, look, I wasn't in the floodplain, why I'm in the floodplain now. We can do public hearings. There's a lot of different things that we can do. But it's not us that they have to appeal to, it's to FEMA. So we're not, eventually we will have to have an ordinance adopting the floodplain maps. But again, this is not work that the city's doing. This is just part of FEMA's program. So I just wanted to show quickly, this was what we sent out in 2010. So it's just a little postcard that we sent out to the 600 and some properties to let them know, hey, things might be changing. Here's a link, and they could go to that link. You can pull up your address, so I did it, and I can see that it changed just a little bit, but it does change with that new data. So the next item is then giving us direction when that 90 days starts to actually have us notify all those property owners and start that process as the good stewards that we are. And it can get very technical, so it tends to have a lot of one-on-one meetings.
Does the expense of those, all of that come out of our budget, or is that
It's
shared?
just our staff time. Yeah, I mean, the postcards aren't that much to mail out, but yeah, it's just part of our operating budget.
Sure. Well, having to work with flood maps in my day-to-day operation, that's a big deal.
A lot.
And I'm glad you pointed that out. I thought for a second there for a moment our internet went back to DSL. I was waiting for it to load.
For
so I'm
for
glad
that
you
picture.
clarified that. Yeah. Any questions for Mike on the FEMA flood map revisions that will be coming forward? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mike. That turns us over to community development, number 1. This will be a resolution approving the issuance of building permit for Lot 1 prior to approval. Mr. Traherne, you want to take that away, please?
Sure. So in your packet there was an illustration and a detail of the property being considered. This is the property just east of the roundabout at 27th and 7th. If there are questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. But what we're waiting for is there were several pieces of property that were combined, and the closings haven't occurred, but they'd like to get the grading in and get the project rolling. So they'd like a permit prior to final plat, and the staff's fine with it. One of the pieces is actually city-owned to be transferred to them. I know their attorney has all the information's reviewing the abstract, so we should be moving forward with that soon. This is not that. Sorry. Everybody's looking up. I'm sorry.
Apparently. We're not on the same page. Okay, any questions for that item for Tom? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Tom. Next item, number 2.
Yes, number 2 is the second reading of the ordinance that we had the public hearing for at the last meeting regarding Robson Homes north of 29th Avenue. And I wanted to make sure that the ordinance was clear in the conversation about the fencing. It was in the packet, and it really just illustrates that the black vinyl fence would be the only fence allowed in the rear yards of the property. And it's not specific to 29th Avenue, and that there would be a homeowners association. So the actual ordinance is in your packet. Those are the 2 conditions, and I just want to make sure that there was nothing else relative to that. If there is, please let me know from a conditions perspective. I did not go back and re-listen to the meeting, and I'll do that before Thursday just to verify. So I know at the end of yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. I guess we're missing a couple people here, but I had a thought about that black fencing, which we did spend a lot of time on, and I was wondering if, and I don't know if it's possible, but Will had suggested a privacy fence. The black chain link is not going to be private, but it's going to be uniform, and so I was wondering if requiring landscape, like a natural boundary instead of the fencing altogether, is something that we should consider, because it could address both issues. If, trees or something, I don't even know what. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know what Tom thinks about that. But I thought that's probably the best look overall. And I just thought I'd throw it out for council to chew on, since we were going back and forth with this a little bit. We all felt like something was needed, but I don't think we were all in 100% agreement with what. We just kind of landed on the black chain link fence. But if we had trees or hedges or something, it could offer privacy for both sides, the drivers and the homeowners, and then not be, not see-through or what have you.
Are you thinking about a berm? A berm with some landscaping on top of it, or?
I'm open, but I just thought a natural boundary as opposed to a fence.
Fine.
So I don't, well, I mean, what's out there? What do you think, Tom, given, what's coming and what you've seen in other communities and what a potential ask could be? Could you give us something to think about?
I think a natural planting is always good, and then if they do a fence to make it black vinyl, I think is at a minimum would be black vinyl. I think you'd almost want to put something specific to no maybe chain link or something consistent proposed by the developer of some sort. But I was just speaking with Mike regarding future street trees in that area. And Mike was indicating that it'd probably be a year or two, but we would ultimately plant some street trees in there that would, so if there was a combination of them planting trees and the city planting trees over time, that would be a buffer of some sort.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, how about,
Natural's always better.
yeah, I think so too. I mean, it could all go away after 20 years. There could be a bad storm, and then we're left with nothing. But I think that could happen with fencing too. I do like the idea of locking in. If someone puts up a fence, it has to be, there has to be a certain one.
Yeah.
But if everybody feels like that is something palatable, a berm, I hadn't even thought about that. Does the topography and everything, would that support, with the sidewalk and the scale to the house, would we be able to require them to do that?
I'd have to look at it a little more.
Yeah, I don't know if that would work, given the.
I'm always a little concerned about the berms, just because then we get into the maintenance of who mows the yard on the backside. But I know this is under HOA, so I don't know if the mowing was part of that. But in it too, I want to be careful with this, but it always looks nice when the development's done. I always want to know, what does it look like in 10 years? If a tree dies and it's one of 30 trees along that road, who replaces it? Whose responsibility is it? It's always those maintenance things that always, same thing with the black chain link fence. I mean, in the future when it needs to be replaced or repaired, is that fence going to be made available? And, those are always, but I do like the natural, again too, it comes back to and having access points to get through to mow between the other side of the natural and the sidewalk, because, going out there on East Post or East Robbins Road, it's still a huge issue of shoveling sidewalks and taking care of maintenance. That's, that wouldn't be these folks, but, again, mowing, seeing parts that are mowed and unmowed through there because somebody doesn't want to go around the other side.
So can we add verbiage along that lines about some natural landscaping, and dependent upon what the developer comes back with, that the staff would have to approve it? I mean, I don't know exactly what the spacing is between the yards and the sidewalk and
Yeah, I like
all of
that,
that,
because
but,
I don't have anything
it's not
specific.
up to us to, if staff can finalize it, we give them the option, I'm
Yeah.
fine with that.
I like that.
That gives me, I think I could probably come up with something and
Okay.
Okay.
wrestle Robson down before Thursday.
I like the idea, though, that we're thinking outside of the box of, not everything has to have a defined boundary, but in this case here, it's just everybody wins out of that deal, because I'm sure the homeowners are going to appreciate the segregation of traffic as well, too, so.
Cool.
Any other comments or suggestions or questions on that particular item?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, well, go ahead, please.
Just real quick, the pond is going to be a wet pond, correct?
Yes.
And is there going to be maintenance? Is that going to be part of the agreement? Do they have to maintain it?
Go fishing there,
And
Paul.
we're anticipating that to be part of the HOA, so it's going to be theirs forever to maintain it and not dedicated to the city?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that'll come out with, the plat. And Mike, I don't, do you know if that, I'm sure that was a private basin within the plat as proposed, and that would be covered in the HOA. No, there's a walking trail, I think, being proposed around it, so they're incorporating that into the design of the subdivision.
Okay. That's all.
Okay. All right, we will move on to number 3.
So 3 and 4 on Thursday are connected there, and so is 5. On Thursday, we'll have a public hearing regarding an amendment to the comprehensive plan. specifically regarding the airport and airport overlay designations within the land use plan, and a resolution approving that. And we'll also be soliciting direction from the council on how to proceed with the zoning. And so we're just wanting to know how to prepare that ordinance moving it forward. So we'll be looking for that from the council. I did want to just kind of walk through a little bit of the land use plan amendment. I know I spoke a long time at the last meeting about the ALP and what that meant, and specifically kind of the details of that, and outlined it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I do think it's worth just understanding on Thursday specifically what we're looking for, and being able to move that off center as we proceed. So one thing I just wanted to note is that it is an amendment to the comp plan as well as the land use plan. I think everybody gets kind of talking about the amendment and thinks of it as the one graphic with an east-west runway and that's it. Well, I mean, it is also an amendment to the city's long-range plan, the comp plan, which is the directive for future growth of the city. So this was done in 2008. We're at that 10-year mark on that, a little bit beyond, and really the comprehensive plan paints the picture for the city and how it grows. And it's built around long-range goals and policies. And I know Renee's been on the planning commission, so she's very versed in the long-range plan and the comp. I think Mr. Jensen's been on there in the past as well. So when we go to review the comp plan and the land use plan, we got to accommodate for the facilities we have, especially if we're going to move towards zoning. So understanding that we acquired the airport, it's in the city, and we're zoning for that, it needs to be an amendment to the plan. So there are specific areas within the comp plan that we plug the airport into, current facilities, commercial and industrial growth areas. So there's certain areas within that document that we make amendments. And I just kind of placed a couple graphics in there, and I know this really isn't in the right mode, is it? Isn't really in the graphics really aren't easy to see, but I just wanted to point out that the airport, when we amend the land use plan, it's really just showing that that's what we're building the community towards. You can see in the bottom graphic here, this is County Home Road, and this is 10th Street, Lucor, extending out to County Home Road. And you can see this is how Echo Hill Road will come up there and connect in the long term. The red area is identified as commercial, and the hatched area is generally high-density residential. So you can see that we go out into the future and kind of plan for what is anticipated through that long-range planning document. So when we look at the airport plan, and I know there's a lot of conversation about what that immediacy is, we're just planning for the future. It's not saying that it's going to happen tomorrow. We're just identifying the roadmap of what the community vision is and how we would grow towards the vision. And the land use plan is really the graphical representation of the goals and policies established within that document. So I just wanted to, give a little briefing on that. I'm sure the council's well aware of it in the past. I think we've walked through the comp plan. The area here, I don't know why. Give me 1 second. Why it's presenting in that mode. You'd think after all the PowerPoints that I've done that I'd figure this out by now. So really what it comes down to in the comprehensive plan is there is one page, and I provided a handout for the council that's really the one page where the airport is brought into play, and it looks like this. It's got the black and white graphic on it, and it really just adds the airport recommendations and policies. And why I bring this up is I just wanted the council to be aware that, when we draft this, the comp plan is supposed to be really represent all of the city's plans in moving the city forward. So the comp plan amendment is referencing directly the ALP because it's an approved document. So when we build the comprehensive plan amendment, we look to the ALP to provide us the direction for that. So you can see the references are directly to the airport layout plan. And you can see on the back of that page, you can see where there are policies, and then it provides some direction as to what to proceed with and how to proceed with implementation of that plan. And so these are specific pages that are going to be inset into the comprehensive plan as it moves forward. So I know there's not a lot of talk about the textual amendments and the recommendations and the policies, but there are reference points to this, and it also provides the documentation and the basis for the zoning that would move forward. So I think what really everybody's talking about is the amendment to the land use plan. Currently, this is the area south of 151, east of 13, north of Seacrest. The purple is industrial, the red is commercial, and the blue is business park land use classifications. And really what happens when you move into the proposed land use plan, which was consistent with the ALP, is you really what we're doing is we've taken into consideration the recent changes, the annexation of some area out there, but really the major change is the inclusion of the primary surface of the runway into the land use plan amendment. I know this graphic is difficult to see, but this really just shows the extent of what the airport would cover. The outer oval areas are really the extent of the conical surface. The lighter gray area as you come in, that's about a 4,000-foot setback. Really everything in that area is limited to 150-foot ceiling, including all the area that's highlighted. One of the key points to this map, and I think it's important as we move forward, is that the green area is agriculture. And I think I've mentioned it in the past, and ag is a completely compatible use to an airport. And as a matter of fact, when you land at any airport, if you look around, most of what you see is agricultural uses. The areas where there's a concern would be to the west of the east-west runway. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I just wanted to point out that existing land uses, as you can see, surrounding the airport, really it's that westernmost area that's of concern. So the airport land use categories, when we do the designation for the airport, really I think the concern are the airport zones. This is the document that you have at the dais. I know this is also difficult to see, and it really kind of illustrates the zones that would be created ultimately with the zoning. And really you have the primary surface, which is essentially the runway. You have a zone A, which is at the end of the runways, runway protection zones. You have the zone B, that's transitional surface, or approach zones, and then the transitional surface, horizontal and conical. What I think folks are talking a lot about as it relates to the land use are the impacts to them specifically as it relates to height requirements. What we're doing with the zoning would be we're not really touching the underlying zoning district classifications because they're all pretty compatible with the airport. Everything west to Highway 13 is either industrial or commercial. Everything north is in the county and ag. Everything east and south is ag use or zoned business office. So from a land use perspective, there's not a lot of impact. From a zoning perspective, the biggest impact will be height. And I think when you have received comments or questions, and even the newspaper articles, a lot of it's been the restrictions that will be provided by virtue of height. And as important as that is to know exactly what that impact is with the zoning, it's difficult for us to really tell each and every property owner, because this isn't going to each property and saying you can only build a 30-foot building or a 50-foot building or a 60-foot building, which is like traditional zoning. It's all based on the elevation of the runway. So the runway is at 865 feet above sea level. So if you have property west of the runway and it sits 30 feet or 20 feet lower, then you already can build up to 30 feet or whatever that difference is. And then the height requirement or restriction by virtue of a zoning of one of those zones, A through E, builds on top of that. So each time a property owner calls and wants to know what their restrictions are, most of the time it's a height restriction requirement, and then we have to go and look at the topography of the ground and understand how that relates to the east-west runway or the north-south runway, whatever's relevant. So I've tried to provide some of the documentation at your dais also, and I'm not going to go through this for everybody, but it talks about the surfaces and where they exist, and then the slopes that are associated. I think Randy wanted the isometric 3D illustration there, which you kind of have to spend some time looking at that, but once you look at it for a while, you'll figure it out. But it is a complicated way upon which we have to review each and every property within the zoning district classifications. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate those areas. And just so the council's aware of kind of the details of the zoning that would come with the land use plan amendment. I think it also is important to note that there's been a lot of comments generated by the public, especially from the Planning Commission meeting forward. We received a petition at the Planning Commission meeting. I believe there was 70-plus signatures, but it represented 40 properties, and so we mapped those, and I'll talk about those here. But I think so we had an Marion Airport Committee meeting last week, and we talked about the land use plan amendment and some of the concerns and comments and questions that have been brought up by council and also by the public. And I think you saw in the last few days the support for the airport come forward. I know today I think we received 18 emails in support of the airport, and so there's a lot of folks out there that are talking about the airport now. I think we're starting to see both sides of that airport conversation. This map, I'd like to just point out that the pink area in the map, those are all the properties, including the lighter area that we've contacted relative to the hearing on Thursday. So I would suspect that we're going to have quite a group of folks here and speaking for and against the airport. I'm just setting you up for that. I forget the number of properties or addresses we've sent out to, but there will be quite a few folks, I'm assuming, in attendance relative to the airport. One thing I want to show on this map is that the green dots represent the location of those that signed the petition that went to the Planning Commission meeting. And difficult to see in this illustration, but the areas outside of the X, those are all, the restrictions at a minimum would be 150 foot above the mean level of the runway. So really all of those properties and the concerns that they have would have to be something other than land use or height requirements, because there's a 150-foot ceiling there, which we had some folks that indicated that they may be impacted by putting a grain elevator up in a grain leg. I think as Mr. Witter spoke beforehand, if someone came in for a variance or a request for additional review, there's opportunities within a zoning ordinance to provide for some of that leeway. Granted, there's still a process. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be a process for that, but it's a safety issue that needs to be addressed. But for most of the folks that were concerned about it, really the impact to their property from a height restriction or zoning restriction is going to be very limited. Even the property owners that are outlined in like this property owner here, I don't know if you can see that, but along the south side of the airport along which would be the south side of the north-south runway. The limitations on their property, I mean, would be greater than 150 foot because their property lies lower than the height or lower than the runway currently exists. And we've done some numbers, and I wasn't planning to go through all this, but some of the bigger concerns have been the west properties, properties west of the east-west runway, so down along 62nd Street, Charlie Rohde's property, where Linmar bus barns are. And even those properties, by virtue of the way that they lay on the ground, are they're the least restrictive, or the highest restriction would still allow them to build a 33-foot high building at the Linmar bus barn up to 56 feet. The individual that was in the county that I think was featured in the newspaper article, they'd be at 189 to 207 foot. I'm not sure how big a grain leg can get, but a water tower is 120 feet, so that's a substantial height issue that they would be contending with. I don't think they're going to have any issues with that. In the petition, there were a number of property owners off 51st and street west of Walmart. You can see there's kind of a glob of green there. There were a number of people that signed that petition. In that vicinity, they're still over 100 feet. They're still able to build up to 100 feet, actually between 112 and 150, depending on where that area is. So the restrictions on the height requirements associated with the airport, because of the elevation of the east-west and north-south run, are not going to be nearly as extreme as I think some folks are anticipating them to be. And I guess that's the point of that conversation, is just that from a land use perspective, on basically all sides except to the west, we've got ag uses, which will have limited impact. I'm sure some people would argue that I'm incorrect in that, and you'll hear some of those arguments, I'm sure, on Thursday. The west land use categories are generally compatible because they're industrial business, and by the time you get west of 13, the plains are at an elevation that the impact will be minor. And so further analysis and really digging into this has provided us a lot more comfort level in those, into how that zoning is going to be implemented. So with that, I'd ask if there's any questions specific to the land use. There's going to be a lot of stuff flying around, I'm sure, on Thursday regarding this issue, but if there's anything I can kind of cover before then, that'd be great.
Tom, just for reference, one of the things that you didn't cover there was, like, in an industrial area, what Marion's current height restrictions are relative to what the ALP would provide for, or the land use map and zoning amendment would provide for.
Sure. In the industrial areas, there's currently a 45-foot height limitation on sites. However, you can increase that by 1 foot for every half foot you set back from the property line. So essentially what that means, again, it's not a straight answer, which doesn't make it great.
I'm looking forward to this one. Please go ahead.
So if you have a property and you wanted to build a 150-foot building, it would have to be set back 75 feet on each side and then still have the allowable buildable space to get to that 150-foot point, which obviously out in that area of the industrial, the lots just aren't that big. Maybe Walmart could do it. But so there's very limited parcels that would even have the availability to build to that height requirement if they did so choose to move in that direction. And honestly, I can't remember the last building outside of the hotel that's built, too substantially higher than 45 feet even would be a stretch, and most industrial buildings aren't built in that manner. I did check with Legacy, and their building plans indicate that the building on the west side of the north-south runway currently was built at, I believe it was 33 feet 6 inches was their highest point of that building. And if you notice, that building is is actually built about, I'm going to say about 10 feet below the elevation of the runway. Now their building does extend into one of the transition zones. That's another conversation, but the change of a runway changes some of those easements, but we can talk about that through the zoning process. But anyway, so.
Tom, if I may just this is just for education for council here. I kind of, after our last meeting, I went through, I insure a fair amount of agriculture, and I went and checked my largest or tallest grain leg over 5 counties is 115 feet high. Okay. And so a grain leg, for those that are not accustomed to agriculture, is basically an operation that allows a semi-truck by nature to come in, unload into an elevator that lifts the grain up to a chute, and then it's redistributed across drying bins or apparatuses that are part of that process, but 115 feet. And I kind of also did a quick average. The average water tower stands actually 165 feet, taller than what we're showing, obviously. But I just want to give council a perspective of what 150 feet looks like. So again, that's neither direction. I just want to help educate what that height is, and what, again, to what Tom is saying is if that runway median, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, you probably know, there's a 6-foot variance in your runway between the middle and the end of the runoff to the south. So, if that drop off is 30 feet, you have up to 180 feet hypothetically to get up to that elevation restriction. So again, this is not in a favor one way or the other. I'm just trying to give education as to what height looks like. And yes, I did appreciate this, by the way. So I use these every day. So thanks.
I think just to reinforce a little bit what Tom said, the key point here is that the underlying zoning for all of these areas is, in almost all cases, more restrictive than what the zoning being contemplated through zoning to match the land use amendment and the ALP would actually create.
Okay, so with that, it is question time of Tom. Who might have any questions for Tom on this particular item here?
Just a general question.
Yes, please. Go
So
ahead.
Tom, I understand the height restriction. The height restriction personally did not bother me, and that's obviously just been confirmed by Randy. So I've never seen any grain legs that high ever as well. So that part never bothered me. But from the standpoint of because you have these different zonings within these concentric circles and areas within this new area, are there also limitations on the types of business that can go in there? So I understand you're calling it manufacturing, you're calling it warehouses, different things. So, but because you're in an airport zone, do you have limitations within those zones on the types of businesses that can be in there? For example, you would not probably have a school, perhaps within that, even though you have no height restriction concern. But would you have a densely populated facility like a school within one of these zones? So are there other restrictions on businesses that can go there?
Well, the only area, the answer is yes. And they're more general in category, like large groups of people, businesses that would have extensive smoke, glare, radio frequency interference, large bodies of water. And so they're more general land use discussions. So if someone came in and said, hey, I wanted to build a church or a school in the approach zone, it wouldn't be that the school or the church itself would be excluded from the use. It would be more about the fact that it's a large gathering of people.
Right.
The same would be like, I think someone gave an example of in Newton, the raceway. So that would be, okay, so that in those situations, what we've drafted out, there would be a review process that would be, so it would require additional review. So for instance, in the case of the race, well, they have 12 races a year. Is that going to be, you know what I mean? So that's just an evaluation that you would use. So without getting on all the details of the zoning, that's how it's structured. It's not specific to like what you're used to seeing in a zoning, like a whole list of uses. It's more about characteristics of the uses. If you look at the guidebook, they do that, but most of the area that's covered under our underlying zoning is industrial office, or is industrial or commercial. So a lot of the uses that are in that guidebook aren't even a permitted use in the underlying zoning, so it's not something we're going to address within the document.
I got one off-the-wall question, and this is, I thought about this. So from the standpoint, I know there has been some discussion about whether certain people may be opposed to the east-west runway. Again, personally, I'm completely in favor of widening and expanding some of the north-south runway. Still not certain I'm in favor of the east-west. But let's assume I'm only in favor of the north-south runway. Mm-hmm. And that creates a little smaller area that we're talking about. So if that's all I'm in favor of, and we're really not talking about a lot of future monetary needs and expansion, in other words, that $20 million budget just got shrunk down significantly, and most of what we're talking about is the immediate funding to widen the runway. A comment was made earlier by Mr. Witter that the zoning will protect the airport. So my thought I had in the past couple of days was if we left the zoning as it is, the city is in control of it and maintains it instead of the state mandating it, saying it has to be zoned in a certain way. What is the protection that the zoning is really giving the airport? And because the reason we're doing this, a lot of this rezoning and the comp is because of the state funding. Am I correct in that? So a lot of this rezoning is being done because we're getting state funding. Is that an accurate statement?
It is in the fact that they tied the runway funding to the fact that it needs to be zoned.
Correct.
But I would contend that if, as a city facility, we already have investments out there that we would want to have zoning in place for the airport.
Okay.
Some zoning to protect at least the airport that is there. Absolutely.
So would that zoning be any different whether we did it on our own or if we did it without state funding? Or because of state funding?
I don't think any of the, it's hard to explain, I don't think any of the zone classifications would change because we would still seek those similar zoning requirements. I know that doesn't sound correct, but whether the airport is a city facility and we're not even looking to the state or not, we would want to maintain those FAA guidance zoning classifications, the height restriction, the map that I handed out with all of the approach zone requirements, transitions. So those are all standard practice. And the last thing I think we'd want to do is have a municipal airport that has all different kinds of approach zones that aren't relative to anything. We want to be consistent with FAA standards.
All right. You've answered my question because my thought was, do we really need or want the state funding? So now you've answered my question on that option. Thank you.
From a staff perspective, one thing I would just point out is that if we proceed and the land use plan is amended, and as indicated, and once we get into the zoning, there are questions. That's where I think a lot of the concerns will be had is in the details of that zoning classification. We've got a pretty solid draft on what that means to each property owner in the area. So if there are concerns specifically with the zoning and the impacts of the property and not having a desire to move forward because of that, I mean, I think that's something that would probably be, worth at least having the conversations with folks based on the ALP and moving the airport forward. If the land use plan is amended and the council holds a public hearing, the zoning has to be read 3 times. I'm sure we'll hear from those that are feeling like they're impacted on what that impact is. Ultimately, the zoning question is the council's. So, but if we don't get to that point, it's kind of, and we're pretty close to that line, to be honest. So, I would just ask that the council consider that as you move forward on the thought process on this, and there'll be more public hearings and more conversations, and the specific impacts would be brought forward at the zoning. So,
Tom, I have a question. One of the things that keeps coming up, and the thing that I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm concerned that this is of a magnitude that it's either going to go or it's not going to go. But I definitely want to make sure that there's clarification that if we were to able to, as in Mr. Jensen's concept and mention there, is to say if we were to lift the east-west runway off of the ALP, does that change your zoning decision at this particular time? The common thread that I'm hearing in conversations are what is being asked of the council is to continue what was approved by a previous council on a grand scheme of things, full build out. I realize Medco wants to use it as a tool, our city wants to use it as a tool, our airport wants to use it as a tool. However, it could be many, many years before that comes through, and I totally get it, but yet this sitting council sits with such a large budget and such a large ask of many, many items that need to be done that I'm concerned that there is no movement on this east-west runway when it goes to a vote. So in order to keep this from failing either all or none, can this be moved to more of a phased concept and look at it from a need basis of saying, hey, we're in supportive of the north-south runway lights, and that's about it. We've entered into an agreement that now all of a sudden everybody's coming before the council saying it needs to be widened, it needs to be lengthened, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. I'm getting committee members that are agitated, but yet they're agitated at a stand of the city now owns this, so now it's an expectation that we need to now fund it, and funded it in advanced, rapid mode above everything else that's needed of the city. So without getting into the deep weeds of that conversation, let you unwind that first couple of questions. Can this be layered out so that this sitting council can move forward with approving what needs to be done, get the construction interface without the golden handcuffs of this east-west runway?
Yeah, I mean, I think an amendment to the like after the public hearing, a resolution to proceed and only amend the comp plan to support the north-south could be made. I would venture to guess that there would need to be some direction for the committee to take a look at the ALP again. But I mean, I think that's within the council's purview. The zoning ordinance actually, it doesn't change a lot. I mean, when you think about it from the districts being created in that map, it's really just the map. You take that away, and it's not like we're going to change anything in any of the zones. It would be the map that would change. So I think that's certainly a direction the council could go with that. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that everyone was clear as to the direction that this potentially could go, and I just want to make sure everybody was clear with that. Any other questions for Tom before we move off of this particular topic? It's a very important one, but yet I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask any questions. Seeing none, we'll move forward. Tom, that brings us up to, is it number 6, or do you feel those are all covered under that?
The last item there, I believe, is just a discussion regarding a citywide amendment to the zoning map. And I'm just take a couple minutes. So as the council's aware, we did proceed to essentially adopt new zoning district classifications for the community some time ago. What we'd like to do, and we can go into this in greater detail at some other point in time, but we'd like some direction from the city council just to move that forward. And what we would do is we would create a process, schedule some meetings, and in the fall, we would do that. And we just don't want to spend a whole lot of time. I'm assuming that there's support for this, but I just didn't want to spend a whole lot of time in creating a process and developing a meeting schedule and such and move that forward without some support from council. I think many of you recall that we did re-adopt or we adopted new zoning district classification. So in the fall, what we were anticipating doing would be holding ward meetings, and then over a very short, like a 2-month period of time, do ward meetings, and then we'd bring it back to the Planning Commission and City Council for a full adoption, which would be the entire city map getting rezoned, which will be very exciting. But we just didn't want to start down that road without some support for council. So if you guys have any questions from that, I'd be happy to answer those. And even if you want to do it offline, that's fine too, or whatever questions you'd have if they're detailed to that. I know I did receive some feedback that we want to make sure that the ward representatives would be available for those meetings, and we'll definitely do that. What we would likely do is schedule the meetings way out in advance and be able to put them in the newsletter with the Swamp Facts so that there would be well in advance notice of what's going on, have the maps available at City Hall, and really kind of have a lot of that groundwork. Because zoning can be a very controversial thing, and we'd rather have a lot of those conversations to be held, offline if they can, just with citizens before coming to a meeting and not understanding everything. So the more information we can get out ahead of time, the better. So.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to say I'm excited that we're doing this. I appreciate the approach of really going out into the city. I can't remember what it was for. It was a couple years ago, but I remember going to something at Lau Park, and Dave Nicholson was there. I think Mike was doing a bunch of park improvements and things to come, and I think it's a really great, the ward meetings, that's it, which we haven't been doing, but this is, I think this is very worthwhile. I like the idea of getting ahead of it, getting out there. Cool.
Any other questions for Tom on number 6? Seeing none, I'd like to thank all the staff and all the public for attending today. That concludes our meeting. Thank you for coming.